So, Dr. Bach, how far is the Georgian political system to the modern British political system?
Well, it's quite a long way off, really.
Yes.
I think Britain's constitutional development is evolutionary, and you can say that it's on the road to the system that we have today, a fully democratic system, but it's still a very long way from that. The power of the monarchy has been constrained, but elections are hardly free and fair. For example, you have to vote openly. Only in 1872 was the secret ballot introduced. Well, can you imagine voting against your landlord? Can you imagine the kind of pressures that you might come under? There's a huge amount of bribery that goes on in elections. The sizes of constituencies are very, very uneven. I mean, there are some constituencies with virtually no electors, and other, especially in the late 18th century, large industrial towns, which have thousands of people and just one elector. Yes, exactly. And there's great unfairness there in the system. There's, of course, who can vote as well. No women can vote, and the number of men who can vote are vastly restricted up until 1832, and the Tory party is adamantly opposed to allowing any kind of liberalisation of that. Eventually, 1832, the Reform Act does open the gates to the kind of reform in the franchise and the right to vote that leads just under 100 years later to both men and women having the vote from the age of 21. So it's a long way off. Parliaments from 1716, there must be elections every 7 years. That's changed to every 5 years in 1911. You do have the development of collective cabinet responsibility, though. That happens under Walpole in the reign of George I. He insists that ministers mustn't start arguing in public. If you're in the cabinet, you toe the line. And that is a feature of modern cabinet government in Britain today. So in general, I would say that we're a very long way off modern democracy, but the direction is there, and there is room for evolution.
Yes.
And there is debate, and that's one of the most important aspects of the modern political system. It's a debating culture, and the very way in which the House of Commons is physically set up with ministers facing the opposition, as in a debating chamber, that's very, very significant, I think, in terms of British culture.
Yes. So the essential features are there, but it has to wait till another 200 years for its maturity.
I think that's right.
Thank you very much. And speaking of literature, it is said that the first half of the 18th century is the age of satire, dominated by Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope. The second half of 18th century is the age of Johnson, dominated by Samuel Johnson. So could you please provide your insight on these prominent literary figures?
Well, I think you're right about satire, perhaps not just the first half of the 18th century. The greatest political satire is Absalom and Achitophel, which is late 17th century by John Dryden. I mean, he points the way there. You then have Alexander Pope, often very critical of Walpole, for example, and indeed of 18th century aristocratic society, whether it's the Rape of the Lock in the 1712 or the Dunciad in the 1740s. But then you've also got political satire at the end of the century, particularly in the political cartoonists. So that's all there. And some of this political satire is extremely savage. I mean, there's the most wonderful pamphlet written by Jonathan Swift called A Modest Proposal in the late 1720s, very highly critical of the British conduct in Ireland. Swift was the Dean of St Patrick's, Dublin, and so he knew all about Ireland and the poverty in Ireland, which was attributable to the neglect of the British government is savagely satirized when he suggests that the way to deal with this and to make Irish families able to keep themselves is for them to sell their babies as food. I mean, it's so outrageous that, but it catches the attention. And the satire of Swift is also found in the most famous of his books, the Gulliver's Travels.
Yes.
And I think the view of human nature that is portrayed there is significant. There's a point where the King of Brobdingnag describes the human race, the Gulliver's race, the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature has ever suffered to crawl upon the face of the earth. Now, you can't have a much lower, a much more critical view of human nature than that.
Yes,
I think that's one of the things that often I reflect upon distinguishes Western culture from, say, Chinese culture. Chinese culture has a very much more positive view of human beings.
Yes.
Chinese culture thinks that basically human beings, as long as they're organized properly and experts put things in the right place, then everything will go well. But Western view of human nature works on the assumption that it is fallen from the Garden of Eden onwards in the Bible, and here Swift is a good example of that. I think it's a very interesting cultural difference. I mean, Johnson, who you mentioned, is a towering figure. His work on Shakespeare, which is not uncritical, and one of the things he criticizes Shakespeare for is a lack of morality in his plays. His work on literary criticism is sort of pioneering, and so, of course, is the dictionary.
Yes, yes.
I mean, the dictionary is an outstanding piece of work. It takes 8 years to produce, and it's the model for everything that comes after.
Yes.
I mean, Johnson was a very Tory writer. He was quite reactionary and conservative in many ways, and we are fortunate in having Boswell's life of him, because that biography brings him to life in the way that no other biography does.
Yeah, that's one of the best biographies in the literature.
Yes. I think you might also mention there are various other very great late 18th century writers. Edward Gibbon would be one to mention. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is one of the first great works of history. History develops much more scientifically in the 19th and early 20th century, but Gibbon is often regarded as the beginning of that development. And so you've got Gibbon, and there are a wide range of other great writers, great authors. There's Richardson, and there's Fielding in novels, and there's Gray in poetry. So it's not just Johnson, but I think Johnson is the most colourful of all these figures.
And he's very interesting personality. And these are the great thinkers, great writers, and they set models for the
Well, great thinkers must also include Adam Smith, of course. We may talk about him later. The Wealth of Nations, where is the origin of free market capitalism that was so successful in promoting Britain and the British Empire.
Yes, and also set the ideological foundation for the Industrial Revolution.
Indeed.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's very insightful and informative. Thank you.